The Knights of the Cross by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Leave a comment if you have an idea for the next book. Chapter 38. But Zbyszko, riding behind him, could not stand it very long, and said to himself, I would rather have him burst forth in anger than become embittered. He therefore rode up to him, and jogging his stirrup against his, he commenced to speak. Listen how it happened. You know what Danusia did for me in Krakow, but you do not know that they proposed to me Jagiełło of Bogdaniec, the daughter of Zik of Zgorzelce. My uncle, Mako, was in favor of it, also her parents and Zik, a relative, an abbot, a wealthy man as well. What is the use of many words? An honest girl and a beautiful woman, and the dowry respectable also. But it could not be. I felt sorry for Jagiełło, but still more so for Danusia, and I set out to her to Mazowsza, because I tell you frankly, I could not live any longer without her. Recollect the time when you yourself loved. Recollect it, and it will not seem strange to you. Here Zbyszko broke off, waiting for a word from Jurand, but as the latter remained silent, he continued. God gave me an opportunity at the forest court to save the princess and Danusia from a wild bull while hunting, and the princess immediately said, Now Jurand will not object any more, because how could he refuse to reward such a deed? But I did not wish to take her even then without your parental consent. Yet I was weak, because the terrible animal injured me so much that it almost killed me. But then, as you know, those people came for Danusia in order to take her, as it seemed, to Spykow, and I was still unable to leave my bed. I thought I should never see her again. I thought that you would take her to Spykow and give her to someone else. You objected to me at Krakow, and I already thought that I should die. Ah, great God, what a night I passed! Nothing but worry, nothing but grief. I thought that if she also left me, the sun would rise no more. Consider human love and human grief. And, for a moment, tears almost choked Zbyszko's voice, but having a courageous heart, he controlled himself and said, The people arrived for her in the evening and wanted to take her immediately, but the princess ordered them to wait until morning. Just then Jesus inspired me with the idea of presenting the princess with my compliments and asking her for Danusia. I thought that if I died I should have that consolation at least. Remember that the girl had to leave, while I remained ill and nearly dying. There was also no time to ask for your permission. The prince was no longer in the forest court. The princess therefore weighed both sides because she had nobody to take counsel with. But they, together with Father Wiszoniek, at last took pity upon me, and Father Wiszoniek performed the ceremony. God's power, God's right. But Jurand interrupted gloomily. And God's punishment. Why should there be punishment? Inquired Zbyszko. Consider only, they had sent for her before the ceremony, and whether it had been performed or not, they would have carried her off nevertheless. But Jurand again replied nothing, and rode on alone, gloomy, and with such a stony face, that though Zbyszko at first felt the relief that confession of a long-concealed thing always produces, at length he was seized with fear and said to himself, with constantly increasing fear, that the old knight was bitterly angered, and that thenceforth they would be strangers and foes to each other. And there came upon him a moment of great depression. He had never felt so badly since his departure from Bogdaniec. It seemed to him now that there was no hope of reconciliation with Jurand, nor, what was far worse, of saving Danusia, that all was of no avail, and that in the future still greater misfortunes and miseries would befall him. But this depression of spirits lasted a short while only, and, in accordance with his nature, it soon changed into anger and a desire for quarreling and fight. He does not want peace, he said to himself, thinking of Jurand. Then let there be discord, let come what will. And he was ready to fly at Jurand's face. He also longed for a fight with anybody for anything, merely to do something, merely to give vent to his grief, bitterness, and anger, and so find some relief. Meanwhile they arrived at an inn at a ford called Swietlik, where Jurand, on his return from the prince's court, usually allowed his people and horses to rest. He did so now also involuntarily. After a while he and Zbyszko found themselves alone in a separate chamber. Suddenly Jurand stopped before the young knight, and fixing his eyes upon him, inquired, Did you wander about for her sake? The other almost harshly retorted, Do you suppose that I shall deny it? and he looked straight into Durand's eyes, ready to meet anger with anger. But there was no indignation in the old warrior's face. There was only almost boundless grief. "And you saved my child?" he inquired after a moment, "and dug me out?" But Zbyszko looked at him in astonishment and fear that his mind was wandering, because Durand repeated exactly the same questions that he had already asked. "Be seated," he said, "because it seems to me that you are still weak." But Durand raised his hands, placed them on Zbyszko's shoulders, and so drew him suddenly with all his strength to his breast. The other, recovering from a momentary amazement, clasped him round the waist, and they embraced each other for a long time, because mutual anxiety and mutual woe united them. After relaxing their hold, Zbyszko again embraced the older knight's knees, and began to kiss his hands with tears in his eyes. "Will you not object to me?" he asked. To that, Durand replied, "I did oppose you, because in my soul I consecrated her to God." "You devoted her to God, and God to me. His will." "His will," repeated Durand. "But now we need mercy also. Whom will God help, if not a father who seeks his daughter? If not a husband who seeks his wife, he will certainly not assist robbers." "But they captured her nevertheless," answered Durand. "Then you will return von Burgau to them." "I shall return all they wish." But at the thought of the Teutons, the old passion soon awoke in him and enfolded him like a flame, because he added after a moment through his clenched teeth, "I shall also add to it what they do not want." "I also swore their ruin," replied Zbyszko, "but now we must make haste to Spykow." And he commenced to hasten the saddling of the horses. Accordingly, after they had eaten their oats and the men had warmed themselves in the rooms, they started out, although it was growing dark outside. As the way was long and a severe frost had set in for the night, Durand and Zbyszko, who had not yet regained their strength, traveled in sledges. Zbyszko told about Uncle Mako, for whom his heart yearned, and regretted that he was not present, because his courage as well as craft might be of use, the latter qualification being more necessary against such foes than courage. At last he turned to Durand and inquired, "And are you cunning? Because I am not." "Neither am I," retorted Durand. "I did not fight them with craft, but with this hand and that which remained in me." "I understand that," said the young knight. "I understand it because I love Danusia, and because they carried her off, if God forbid." And he did not finish, because the mere thought made him feel not a human, but a wolf's heart in his breast. For some time they rode silently over a white, moonlight-flooded road. Then Durand commenced to speak as if to himself. "If they only had any reason to take revenge on me, I would not say. But gracious God, they had none. I waged war with them in the field, when sent on an embassy by our prince to Witold, but here I was like a neighbor to neighbors. Bartosz Natych captured, chained, and imprisoned underground in Kosmin 40 knights who attacked him. The Teutons were compelled to pay half a wagonful of money for them, while I, when a German guest happened to come on his way to the Teutons, received and rewarded him like one knight another. Frequently also the Teutons came against me across the swamps. I was not hard on them then, and they did to me what I would not do even today to my greatest foe." And terrible recollections began to tear him with increasing force. His voice died away for an instant in his breast. Then he said, half groaning, "I had only one, like a ewe lamb, like the heart in my breast, and they captured her like a dog on a rope, and she died there. Now again the child, Jesus, Jesus." And again there was silence. Zbyszko raised his youthful, perplexed face toward the moon, then again looked at Durand and inquired, "Father, it would be far better for them to earn men's esteem than their vengeance. Why do they commit so much wrong on all nations and all people?" But Durand spread his hands apart as if in despair, and replied with a choked voice, "I do not know." Zbyszko meditated for a time over his own question. Presently, however, his thoughts turned to Durand. "People say that you wreaked a worthy vengeance," he said. Durand meanwhile controlled his anguish, bethought himself, and said, "But I swore their ruin, and I also swore to God that if he would permit me to glut my vengeance, I would surrender to him the child that was left to me. This is the reason why I objected to you. But now I do not know, was it his will, or did you awaken his anger by your action?" "No," said Zbyszko. "I told you once before that even if the ceremony had not been performed, yet the scoundrels would have carried her off. God accepted your vow and presented me with Danusia, because without his will we could accomplish nothing. Every sin is against God's will. A sin is, but not the sacrament, because the sacrament is God's matter. Therefore there is no help, and God be blessed there is not. Therefore do not complain, because nobody would help you against the robbers so well as I will. You will see. In any case I shall pay them for Danusia, but even if one of those who captured your deceased be still alive, leave him to me, and you shall see. But Durand shook his head. No, he answered gloomily, none of those will be alive. For a time only the snorting of horses and the smothered echo of the hoofs striking against the beaten road was audible. Once at night, continued Durand, I heard a voice, as if coming from a wall, saying to me, Enough vengeance! But I did not obey, because it was not the voice of the deceased. And whose voice could that be? Inquired Zbyszko anxiously. I do not know. In Spykow frequently something talks in the walls, and sometimes moans, because many have died there in chains underground. And what does the priest tell you? The priest sanctified the castle, and also ordered me to relinquish vengeance, but that could not be. I became too hard on them, and then they themselves sought revenge. They lay in ambush and challenged me in the field, and so it was this time. Meiniger and von Bergau were the first to challenge me. Did you ever accept ransom? Never. Of those I have captured, von Bergau will be the first to come out alive. The conversation ceased, because they now turned from the broad highway into a narrower road, on which they traveled for a long time in silence on account of its tortuous course, and because in some places the snow formed drifts difficult to traverse. In the spring or summer, on rainy days, this road must have been almost impassable. Are we approaching Spykow already? Asked Zbyszko. Yes, answered Durand. There is a good deal of forest yet, and then begin the morasses, in the center of which is the castle. Beyond the morasses are the marshes and dry fields, while the castle can be approached only by the dike. The Germans wished to capture me repeatedly, but they could not, and their bones rot among the forest weeds. And it is hard to find, said Zbyszko. If the Teutons send messengers with letters, how will they find us? They have sent out several times already, and they have people who know the way. If we could only meet them at Spykow, said Zbyszko. This wish was realized sooner than the young knight thought, for issuing from the forest into the open country, where lay Spykow among the swamps, they perceived before them 2 riders and a low sledge, in which were sitting 3 dark figures. The night was very bright, therefore the whole group was perfectly visible against the white background of snow. Durand's and Zbyszko's heart began to beat faster at this sight, because who else would be riding to Spykow in the middle of the night but the messengers from the Teutons? Zbyszko ordered the driver to go faster, and so they soon came so near each other that they could be heard, and 2 riders, who apparently watched over the safety of the sledge, turned to them, and, unslinging their crossbows, cried, Who is there? Germans, whispered Durand to Zbyszko. Then he raised his voice and said, It is my right to ask and yours to reply. Who are you? Travelers. What sort of travelers? Pilgrims. Where from? From Szczytno. It is they, again whispered Durand. Meanwhile the sledges had come together, and at the same time 6 horsemen appeared before them. This was the guard of Spykow, which watched the dike leading to the castle day and night. With the horses were very large and savage dogs, exactly resembling wolves. The guardsmen, having recognized Durand, began to utter cries of welcome, mingled with astonishment that the master had returned so soon and unexpectedly. But he was entirely engaged with the messengers, and therefore turned to them again. Where are you traveling to? He asked. To Spykow. What do you want there? We can tell that only to the Lord himself.
Remember to subscribe.